A rich and bitter businessman hears a child singing on the street with a voice that touches his soul. But when he decides to help him, he discovers an unexpected connection that will lead him to confront a past he thought was lost forever. Rafael Montenegro walked quickly through the city streets. The meeting that morning had been more tense than usual, and the echoes of the negotiations still resonated in his head. The imposing buildings around him seemed to press down on him with their coldness, reflecting the constant pressure he carried as a successful businessman. With his leather briefcase in one hand and his brow furrowed, he was so absorbed in his thoughts that he barely noticed the bustle of the city around him. Suddenly, a peculiar sound stopped him dead in his tracks. It was a voice, clear and melodic, that rose above the noise of cars and conversations. Rafael turned his head, intrigued, searching for the origin of that song that seemed to speak directly to his soul. There on a street corner, a boy of no more than 12 years old was singing with a passion that belied his disheveled appearance. He wore worn-out clothes and torn sneakers and held a worn-out cap into which fell a few coins left by passers-by. His voice had something indescribable, an echo of pain and hope that resonated deeply in Rafael. The businessman stood still, watching the boy as he finished the song. Every word, every note seemed to tell a story of struggle that Rafael could not ignore. When the boy finished, he bowed his head in a shy gesture, thanking the coins that some had thrown in. Rafael, driven by a mixture of curiosity and something he couldn't define, approached slowly. He took a bill out of his wallet and placed it in the boy's cap. "You have an incredible voice," he commented, breaking the silence between them. The child looked at him distrustfully, as if he was accustomed to the empty words of adults. "Thank you," he replied, his voice much lower than when he sang. "What's your name?" Rafael asked, trying to sound friendly. "Joãozinho," answered the boy, avoiding his gaze. Rafael noticed that the boy seemed to be on the defensive, as if any kind gesture could be a trap. Without insisting, he changed his strategy. "Have you eaten today?" Joãozinho hesitated before answering, but his empty stomach betrayed any attempt to hide the truth. Rafael seized the moment. "How about I treat you to something to eat?" The boy looked at him skeptically, but finally nodded, perhaps tempted by the possibility of a hot meal. Rafael led him to a small restaurant nearby. While they waited for the food, Joãozinho barely spoke, limiting himself to looking around cautiously. Rafael, for his part, couldn't help but feel an inexplicable connection with that boy. There was something in his eyes and his way of moving that awakened memories buried deep within him. When the food arrived, Joãozinho devoured the dish with a speed that spoke of days of pent-up hunger. Rafael watched him in silence, trying to understand why that encounter had affected him so much. "Where do you live?" he finally asked cautiously. Joãozinho looked up but didn't answer. Instead, he shrugged, as if the question were of no importance. Rafael didn't press the issue, understanding that this boy lived in a world where trusting others could be dangerous. As he said goodbye, Rafael felt a mixture of satisfaction and a strange uneasiness. Something about Joãozinho had touched him deeply, and although he didn't know exactly why, he was certain that this meeting was no coincidence. As the boy disappeared into the crowd, Rafael stood on the sidewalk, watching the shadows of dusk begin to cover the city. Night had fallen over the city, but Rafael Montenegro could not sleep. Sitting in the armchair of his spacious apartment, with a glass of whiskey in his hand, his mind returned again and again to the image of Joãozinho. There was something about the boy that awakened memories that Rafael had tried to bury for years. In the dim light, her gaze fell on an old framed photograph on the bookshelf. In it, a dark-haired, bright-eyed boy smiled innocently. Miguel, her lost son. Rafael closed his eyes, allowing the memories to flow like an unstoppable current. So much time had passed, but the wound was still open, bleeding silently. He remembered the happy days when Miguel filled the house with his laughter, before everything fell apart. The separation from his wife had been bitter and chaotic. The arguments, the screams, and the legal battle for custody had left deep scars on all of them. But the moment that haunted him most was the last day he saw his son. Amid a courtroom melee, Miguel, barely a boy, had disappeared. Despair and guilt had consumed him ever since. Rafael had tried everything to find him. He hired detectives, reported him missing, offered rewards. But over time, the leads went cold, and the world around him insisted he accept the loss. Though he had never stopped searching, a part of him had given up, shutting himself off from the pain in order to move forward. But the encounter with Joãozinho had opened a door that Rafael believed was forever closed. He couldn't ignore the similarities, the age, the facial features, the intensity in the boy's eyes. But he knew he had to be cautious. What if this was all just a desperate illusion? The next day, from his car parked discreetly on a corner, Rafael watched Joãozinho from afar. The boy sang as he had done the day before, surrounded by the coming and going of passers-by. Rafael took note of every detail, the gestures, the expressions, even the way Joãozinho interacted with other street children. As he looked at him, an idea began to form in his mind. He needed to know more about Joãozinho's past, where he came from, who he was, but doing so would require discretion. Rafael knew that facing his own hopes was risky, but he couldn't ignore the possibility that, after so many years, his son was standing before him. With his heart heavy with doubt and renewed determination, Rafael decided he would investigate. He couldn't afford another failure, but he couldn't live with uncertainty either. Joãozinho deserved a chance, and he needed answers. Rafael was quick to act. The anxiety that had accompanied him during the last few nights was transformed into a concrete plan. He needed professional help to better understand Joãozinho. After looking for information about institutions that worked with street children, his search led him to Helena, a social worker known for her tireless dedication. On the day of the meeting, Rafael arrived at Helena's small office. The modest but organized office was decorated with children's drawings and photos of community events. As he entered, Rafael felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. Helena, a middle-aged woman with a warm but firm gaze, greeted him politely. "How can I help you, Mr. Montenegro?" she asked, inviting him to sit down. Rafael wasted no time in explaining his situation. He described the encounter with Joãozinho, the connection he felt with the boy, and the similarities that had led him to think of his lost son. As he spoke, he noticed that Helena was listening attentively, but without making hasty judgments. "Joãozinho is one of the children we help occasionally," she said, folding her hands on her desk. "We found him a few years ago on the streets. He was very small, he had no papers, and he couldn't clearly explain where he came from. As far as we know, he's been living alone ever since." Helena's words echoed in Rafael's mind. Every detail seemed to fit, but there were still too many unanswered questions. "He never mentioned anything about his family?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure. Helena shook her head. "He is a reserved child. Talking about his past is not something he does easily, and we don't pressure him. We know that many of these children have been through traumatic experiences." Rafael nodded, understanding the implications. However, he couldn't ignore the possibility that was tormenting him. "Helena," he said after a pause, "I think Joãozinho could be my son." The social worker looked at him with a mixture of surprise and caution. "That is very serious, Mr. Montenegro. If you are right, it would be wonderful news. But I want to warn you that it will not be an easy road. Joãozinho has learned to distrust people. If you approach him without conclusive evidence, you could do more harm than good." Rafael knew he was right. He couldn't rush things, but he couldn't leave things as they were either. "What do you suggest I do?" he asked, willing to follow any advice that would bring him closer to the truth. Helena thought for a moment before answering. "The first thing is to gain his trust, but without overwhelming him. If you have the means to investigate his past without directly involving him, do so. And if you find something that confirms your suspicions, then we can work together to approach him appropriately." Rafael left the office with a mixture of hope and responsibility. He knew he had a long road ahead of him, but he was determined to follow it. Joãozinho deserved the truth, and he needed to face it, whatever it was. Rafael had followed Helena's advice and decided to approach Joãozinho little by little. He didn't want to force him, but impatience was eating him up inside. For several days, he watched the boy from afar, looking for the right moment to initiate new contact. Joãozinho, however, seemed always alert, as if he could detect any hidden intention from miles away. One day, Rafael found him in a nearby square, singing with the same passion that had captivated him the first time. Without thinking twice, he approached and dropped a coin in his cap, trying to start a conversation. "Hi, Joãozinho. How are you today?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The boy looked at him suspiciously, pursing his lips before answering. "Fine. What do you want now?" The coldness in her tone made Raphael understand how complicated it would be to gain her trust. "Nothing. I just wanted to hear you sing again. You have a great talent, you know?" Joãozinho didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed his cap and started walking away, leaving Raphael with a feeling of frustration and a knot in his stomach. As the businessman tried to plan his next move, a figure emerged from the shadows. He was a tall, burly man with an intimidating expression and a clearly menacing attitude. Raphael had seen him before, always near Joãozinho, but he had never paid much attention. Now he understood that this man, Lucas, was more than a spectator. "What are you doing here?" Lucas asked abruptly, crossing Raphael's path. "I just wanted to help the boy," Raphael replied, keeping calm. Lucas laughed, but there was no humor in his laugh. "Joãozinho doesn't need your help. We'll take care of him." Raphael felt the tension in the air. He understood that Lucas was not one to accept interference. He watched as the man followed Joãozinho, his words laden with warning echoing in his mind. That night, as he reflected on what had happened, Raphael realized that Joãozinho was not only facing abandonment and mistrust, but also exploitation. Lucas seemed to control the street children, using them to obtain money while keeping them under his control. The businessman knew he couldn't confront him directly, at least not yet. Any impulsive action could put Joãozinho in more danger. However, he couldn't just sit back and do nothing. With each passing day, Raphael felt his connection with Joãozinho growing, even though the boy constantly rejected him. There was something inside him that told him he couldn't give up this fight. Determined, Raphael began planning his next move. Not only did he have to find a way to protect Joãozinho from Lucas, but he also had to show him that not all intentions were guided by interest or control. The night was filled with uncertainty as Raphael leafed through the documents his private detective had gathered. The decision to hire him had been difficult, but necessary. He needed answers, and time seemed to be running out. On the table, an open folder showed blurry photographs of Joãozinho and some scattered notes about his life on the streets. However, a small object placed with the first page caught Raphael's attention. An old leather bracelet with the name Miguel engraved on it. His heart raced. That bracelet had been a gift he himself had given to his son on his 5th birthday. The image of Miguel running through the garden with the bracelet on his wrist flooded his mind, bringing with it a mixture of joy and pain. "Where did you find this?" he asked the detective, trying to hide the emotion in his voice. "Lucas had it. It seems that Joãozinho carried it around like a lucky charm. I'm not sure how it came into his possession, but it's clear that it's important to him." Raphael tightened his grip on the bracelet, feeling the weight of possibilities. If Joãozinho really was his son, what did it mean that he was under the control of someone like Lucas? Over the next few days, Raphael watched the boy from a distance, now with a mixture of hope and fear. Joãozinho continued to sing in the same streets, his voice echoing with a sadness that Raphael understood all too well. In every gesture, in every look, Raphael searched for signs that would confirm what his heart was already beginning to believe. Finally, she decided she had to get closer, even if only a little. One afternoon, she waited for Joãozinho to finish singing and intercepted him as he packed his few belongings into a worn backpack. "Joãozinho, wait," he said cautiously, holding out the bracelet in front of him. The boy frowned at the sight, as if he recognized the object, but did not understand why Raphael had it. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his tone full of suspicion. "I was told it was yours," Raphael replied. "I wanted to know where you got it." Joãozinho shrugged, avoiding Raphael's gaze. "I always had it. I don't know where it came from." Raphael felt a lump in his throat. The boy's words seemed to confirm that the bracelet had been with him since he was little, but his memory, fragmented by years and circumstances, could not fill in the gaps. "It's important to me," Raphael said, choosing his words carefully. "That bracelet belonged to someone who meant a lot to me." Joãozinho looked at him for a moment, and Raphael could see the internal struggle reflected in his eyes. There was mistrust, but also something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or even a spark of recognition. "Why do you care so much?" he finally asked. Raphael sighed, knowing he couldn't reveal everything at once. Because I think you could be that person. Joãozinho didn't answer right away. He took the bracelet in his small hands and held it as if trying to find answers in it. I don't know who I am, he admitted quietly, almost as if he were talking to himself. But I always felt like someone was looking for me. The boy's words echoed in Raphael's heart, giving him new determination. This was just the beginning, and he knew he had to handle it carefully. The tension in the air was palpable. Since his last encounter with Joãozinho, Raphael had been more alert than ever, closely following the steps of the boy and, above all, Lucas. There was something dangerous about this man, a sense of constant threat that became more evident with each passing day. One afternoon, as he watched from his parked car on a busy street, Raphael saw Lucas approach Joãozinho. From afar, he could sense the tense exchange between the two. Lucas spoke in an authoritative tone, while the boy kept his head down, clearly uncomfortable. Raphael gripped the steering wheel, resisting the urge to intervene. Later that night, he received an unexpected call. The number was unknown, but something inside him warned him to answer. "Mr. Montenegro, right?" said a gruff voice on the other end of the line. Raphael felt a chill as he recognized the tone. "Who is speaking?" "Let's say someone has something you want." Raphael's heart began to beat rapidly. "Joãozinho? Where is?" Lucas's laughter echoed on the other end. "Calm down, it's okay. For now, but that's up to you. I want 100,000 reals in cash. Otherwise, you'll never see him again." Raphael felt panic rising in him. His first reaction was to accept without hesitation, but he knew he had to be careful. "How do I know she's safe?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. There was a brief silence followed by a background noise. Joãozinho's shaky voice was heard on the other end. "Raphael, please," was all he managed to say before the call was cut off. Raphael stood still, the phone still in his hand. Desperation flooded through him, but he couldn't allow himself to lose control. He immediately called Helena, quickly explaining the situation. "Lucas is dangerous," Helena warned. "He has contacts in places that will complicate any intervention by the authorities." "So what do we do?" Raphael asked, his voice filled with anguish. "Let me make some calls. I know people who might be able to help us locate him, but you need to stay calm." Raphael knew that every minute counted. While he waited for news from Helena, he began to draw up a desperate plan. He could not stand by while Joãozinho was in danger. Hours later, he received a message from Helena. They had located the place where Lucas used to operate, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. With the location in mind and his heart full of determination, Raphael knew there was no turning back. Joãozinho depended on him, and he couldn't let him down. The abandoned warehouse loomed like a menacing shadow on the outskirts of the city. Raphael parked his car a safe distance away and turned off the lights. His heart pounded as he studied the building through the darkness. Helena had insisted that he wait for backup, but Raphael couldn't stand still while Joãozinho was in danger. With a flashlight in hand and his phone in his pocket, he approached the warehouse. Broken glass and rust on the walls were testament to time and neglect. From one of the windows, Raphael saw a faint light inside, confirming that Lucas and Joãozinho were there. As she weighed her options, she heard voices coming from the building. Lucas was talking to someone else, his harsh tone filled with impatience. "We don't have all day. I want the money now," he said, clearly addressing his accomplice. Raphael gritted his teeth, trying to control the fear that threatened to paralyze him. He remembered Helena's advice: act calmly but with determination. He crept around the side of the building, looking for an entrance. Finally, he found a side door slightly ajar. Inside, the atmosphere was oppressive. Shadows from piled-up objects created ghostly figures under the dim light of a hanging bulb. From his position, Raphael saw Joãozinho sitting on the floor, his hands tied and his gaze full of fear. Lucas was standing in front of him, talking on the phone, while his accomplice watched with a bored expression. Raphael knew he had to act fast. He pulled out his phone and texted Helena to report his exact location, hoping she would arrive in time with help. In the meantime, he grabbed a metal bar he found on the ground and prepared himself for what was to come. Taking a deep breath, he silently moved forward until he was close enough. "Hey!" he shouted, causing Lucas and his accomplice to turn around immediately. Surprise was his ally. Before Lucas could react, Raphael slammed the bar against a nearby shelf, causing several boxes to fall to the floor with a crash. The distraction allowed Juanzinho to move slightly, trying to untie the ropes holding him. Lucas advanced towards Raphael with fury. "You think you can play with me, you arrogant rich man?" he roared, launching himself towards him. The confrontation was quick and chaotic. Raphael, although not accustomed to violence, fought with everything he had, driven by the need to protect Juanzinho. Amidst the chaos, police sirens broke the silence of the night. Helena had done her part, and the authorities arrived just in time. Lucas and his accomplice tried to escape, but were arrested before they could flee. Raphael, exhausted but relieved, approached Juanzinho and untied him. The boy looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and excitement. "Why did you do this?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Because I couldn't lose you," Raphael answered sincerely. The rescue had left Raphael exhausted, but also with a new determination. That night, after making sure Juanzinho was safe under Helena's supervision, he decided it was time to talk to the boy. He knew the truth had to come out, even though the risk of rejection terrified him. The next day, Raphael went to the care center where Helena had taken Juanzinho. The boy was sitting in a corner of the yard, absent-mindedly playing with the bracelet he always carried with him. Raphael took a deep breath before approaching. "Can I sit with you?" he asked cautiously. Juanzinho looked up, still with a trace of mistrust, but finally nodded. Raphael sat down next to him, keeping a respectful distance. "I want to tell you something important," he said, choosing his words carefully. Juanzinho watched him silently, his fingers still playing with the bracelet. Raphael took a breath and pulled out a photo from his wallet. It was the same one that had been on his shelf for years, a picture of Miguel smiling, with the bracelet on his wrist. "This is my son, Miguel," he said, showing the photo to the boy. "I lost him a long time ago, and all this time, I have been looking for him." Juanzinho looked at the photo intently. His eyes narrowed, as if he were trying to recall something lost in the depths of his memory. "That bracelet," Raphael continued, pointing at the object in the boy's hands. "I gave it to Miguel on his birthday. It was a special gift, something that meant a lot to both of us." Juanzinho squeezed the bracelet tightly, as if the object could give him answers. "I don't remember much," he admitted quietly, almost ashamed. "Sometimes I dream about things, people, but I don't know if they're real." Raphael felt a lump in his throat. "You don't have to remember everything now, but I want you to know that from the moment I saw you, I felt something special. And when I saw that bracelet, I had hope again." Juanzinho looked down, processing Raphael's words. After a long silence, he looked up with eyes full of questions. "Why do you care so much? If it were me, what would I change?" Raphael swallowed, fighting to contain his emotion. "Because if you are my son, I want to make up for the time we lost. But even if you're not, I want you to know that you're not alone. No one should feel forgotten or abandoned." The words seemed to reach Juanzinho's heart. For the first time, his eyes showed something other than distrust, a spark of hope. "I want to know who I am," he said finally, his voice firm. "I want to understand why I've always felt like something was missing." Raphael nodded. "We will do this together. No matter how long it takes, I will not stop searching for the truth with you." As the sun began to set, a faint sense of trust began to form between them. It was only the beginning of a long road, but at least now they wouldn't be alone. The relationship between Raphael and Juanzinho slowly began to transform. After that conversation in the courtyard, something had changed in the boy's attitude. Although he still showed reservations, he seemed willing to listen, and at times he showed a curiosity about the man who had risked so much to save him. Raphael, for his part, tried hard not to rush things. Helena had insisted that the process had to be slow and that any pressure could cause Juanzinho to shut down again. So Raphael took a patient approach, spending time with the boy in simple activities. Walks in the park, meals in quiet places, even short trips to the local bookstore. At first, Juanzinho kept an emotional distance. He avoided talking about his past and seemed reluctant to accept Raphael's kind gestures. But little by little, the walls he had built began to crumble. One afternoon, while sharing ice cream on a park bench, Juanzinho asked a question that took Rafael by surprise. "What was Miguel like?" she asked, looking at the sky with apparent indifference, although her tone betrayed genuine interest. Rafael smiled, remembering the happy times he had spent with his son. "He was a very energetic child," she replied. "He loved running around the garden and asking questions about everything. He had an infectious laugh and always found ways to surprise me." Juanzinho listened to him in silence, absorbing every word. "Do you think I could be like him?" she asked quietly. The rescue had left Rafael exhausted, but also with a new determination. That night, after making sure Juanzinho was safe under Helena's supervision, he decided it was time to talk to the boy. He knew the truth had to come out, even though the risk of rejection terrified him. The next day, Rafael went to the care center where Helena had taken Juanzinho. The boy was sitting in a corner of the yard, absent-mindedly playing with the bracelet he always carried with him. Rafael took a deep breath before approaching. "Can I sit with you?" he asked cautiously. Juanzinho looked up, still with a trace of mistrust, but finally nodded. Rafael sat down next to him, keeping a respectful distance. "I want to tell you something important," he said, choosing his words carefully. Juanzinho watched him silently, his fingers still playing with the bracelet. Rafael took a breath and pulled out a photo from his wallet. It was the same one that had been on his shelf for years, a picture of Miguel smiling, with the bracelet on his wrist. "This is my son, Miguel," he said, showing the photo to the boy. "I lost him a long time ago, and all this time, I have been looking for him." Juanzinho looked at the photo intently. His eyes narrowed, as if he were trying to recall something lost in the depths of his memory. "That bracelet," Rafael continued, pointing at the object in the boy's hands. "I gave it to Miguel on his birthday. It was a special gift, something that meant a lot to both of us." Juanzinho squeezed the bracelet tightly, as if the object could give him answers. "I don't remember much," he admitted quietly, almost ashamed. "Sometimes I dream about things, people, but I don't know if they're real." Rafael felt a lump in his throat. "You don't have to remember everything now, but I want you to know that from the moment I saw you, I felt something special. And when I saw that bracelet, I had hope again." Juanzinho looked down, processing Rafael's words. After a long silence, he looked up with eyes full of questions. "Why do you care so much? If it were me, what would I change?" Rafael swallowed, fighting to contain his emotion. "Because if you are my son, I want to make up for the time we lost. But even if you're not, I want you to know that you're not alone. No one should feel forgotten or abandoned." The words seemed to reach Juanzinho's heart. For the first time, his eyes showed something other than distrust, a spark of hope. "I want to know who I am," he said finally, his voice firm. "I want to understand why I've always felt like something was missing." Rafael nodded. "We will do this together. No matter how long it takes, I will not stop searching for the truth with you." As the sun began to set, a faint sense of trust began to form between them. It was only the beginning of a long road, but at least now, they wouldn't be alone. The relationship between Rafael and Juanzinho slowly began to transform. After that conversation in the courtyard, something had changed in the boy's attitude. Although he still showed reservations, he seemed willing to listen, and at times he showed a curiosity about the man who had risked so much to save him. Rafael, for his part, tried hard not to rush things. Helena had insisted that the process had to be slow and that any pressure could cause Juanzinho to shut down again. So Rafael took a patient approach, spending time with the boy in simple activities. Walks in the park, meals in quiet places, even short trips to the local bookstore. At first, Juanzinho kept an emotional distance. He avoided talking about his past and seemed reluctant to accept Rafael's kind gestures. But little by little, the walls he had built began to crumble. One afternoon, while sharing ice cream on a park bench, Juanzinho asked a question that took Rafael by surprise. "What was Miguel like?" she asked, looking at the sky with apparent indifference, although her tone betrayed genuine interest. Rafael smiled, remembering the happy times he had spent with his son. "He was a very energetic child," she replied. "He loved running around the garden and asking questions about everything. He had an infectious laugh and always found ways to surprise me." Juanzinho listened to him in silence, absorbing every word. "Do you think I could be like him?" she asked quietly. He also faced his own challenges. Every gesture of distrust, every prolonged silence, was a reminder of how fragile the connection they were building was. One night, while Rafael was driving him back to the care center, Juanzinho spoke on his own initiative. "I think I want to try to remember more things, but I'm afraid of what I might find." Rafael stopped the car and looked at him seriously. "You don't have to do it alone. I'll be with you, no matter what." Juanzinho nodded, and at that moment, something in his expression changed. For the first time, he seemed to be letting his guard down completely. Although the road was long, they were both learning to walk together, step by step, rebuilding a bond that could change their lives forever. The legal proceedings were long and complicated, but Rafael finally managed to obtain custody of Juanzinho. Now, after months of uncertainty, they were ready to begin a new stage together. The decision to leave the city was mutual. Rafael wanted to offer Juanzinho a quieter environment, away from the shadows of the past. After doing some research, they found a small rural community with green mountains and a crystal-clear river running nearby. It was a perfect place for a new beginning. Moving day came with a mix of excitement and nostalgia. Juanzinho, holding his backpack, looked for the last time at the streets that had been his home. Although life in the city had been hard, it was also all he knew. Rafael, noticing the melancholy on the boy's face, put a hand on his shoulder. "This is our first step towards something better," he said with a smile. The journey to the countryside was quiet at first, but as the urban landscapes gave way to hills and trees, Juanzinho began to relax. When they arrived at their new home, a cozy house surrounded by wildflowers, the boy could not hide his surprise. "Is all this for us?" he asked, his eyes shining with excitement. "This is all for us," Rafael replied, pleased to see the spark of happiness on the boy's face. The days in the countryside brought with them a peace that they both needed. Juanzinho, who had spent much of his life surviving on the streets, began to discover a new world. Star-filled nights, the bird song at dawn, and the simple pleasure of running barefoot through the grass. Rafael, for his part, found renewed purpose in caring for Juanzinho. He had left behind the endless meetings and pressure of business to devote himself completely to building a life with the boy he now considered his son. Over time, Juanzinho began to share his passion for music with the inhabitants of the community. Every week, he organized small outdoor concerts, where his voice resonated with a force that moved all who heard it. "I want my voice to help other children like me," she said one day, while practicing a song on the porch. Rafael looked at him with pride. "And you will. You have incredible talent and an even bigger heart." Inspired by Juanzinho's determination, Rafael began investing in community programs to help homeless children. He used his resources to create shelters, offer education, and provide opportunities that once seemed impossible. On his last night on the porch under a starry sky, Juanzinho picked up the guitar Rafael had given him and sang a new song. It was a melody full of hope, one that spoke of second chances and finding a home in the most unexpected places. Rafael listened in silence, feeling that finally they had both found what they were looking for. Not only had they given themselves a new start, but they had also learned the true meaning of family. As the notes of the song filled the air, the future looked bright before them, full of possibilities and a love that had managed to overcome all adversities. The story of Rafael and Juanzinho teaches us that second chances can transform lives, even in the darkest moments. Sometimes fate puts us in front of unexpected tests that force us to look beyond the superficial and make decisions guided by the heart. What would you have done if you were in Rafael's shoes? Would you have had the courage to face your past and fight for someone who needed it, even without certainties? Click on the video on the screen to continue this exciting journey of self-discovery and hope. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories full of emotions and reflections. See you in the next video.